everybody, and welcome to Climate and Cuisine, the podcast of Climate Diet. My name is Jane DeMarines, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Diet. And today we're happy to have two or maybe one journalists with us, Carolyn Fortuna and Steve Hanley, both with CleanTechnica, an impressive website that produces and news source that produces news, especially about energy, including a button just for Tesla articles. So Carolyn is with us. We may or may not have Steve, who has been detained, but if he isn't able to make it today, we hope we'll have him at another podcast at a later time. So Carolyn, welcome.
Thanks so much, Jane.
And thanks for the kind of journalism that you've done. I got to meet you by phone when you wrote an article that was titled, "What is the biggest contributor to methane emissions, fossil fuels or cattle?" And so I was really impressed. It's a narrow topic, but certainly with a name like Climate Diet, we're interested in exactly that kind of thing. So I was going to bring up the article that you wrote that talked about this. And in that article, you referenced a survey. What does it mean to eat a plant-based diet? You reference a survey from AP, Associated Press, in 2023, saying 4% of US residents identified as vegetarian, 3% as vegan, and 45% said they were eating less meat, and 46% said they were eating less dairy. So that was all encouraging to me, and a great piece of journalism with a lot more to it. I don't know if you'd like to just jump in. I know you are a vegetarian, and talk about how your own vegetarianism has informed your work, and in specifically anything about that article that you'd like to jump into.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so, Jane. Well, as you mentioned, for your audience, I have been mostly my entire life a vegetarian. I started in my 20s because I had some mentors who helped me understand what it meant to lead a life that did not consume red meat. And that was difficult. And it is something that I continue to mentor other younger people to help them understand that it is not only a lifestyle choice, but rather it is a dietary choice. And we have to be healthy if we're going to be vegetarians. That being said, my whole understanding of what it means to be a vegetarian has clearly evolved over the years. I took on clearly an ethical component, understanding the ability of animals to feel and experience pain, and how humans perhaps need to be more conscious of our interplay with the natural world. It really wasn't only until about 10 years ago that I began to understand that there was a third and very important dimension to this, in that we have made a terrible impact on the world through the raising of cattle. And cattle, through their burps and their poops, do produce methane, and that has been quite detrimental to the climate. Perhaps
Absolutely.
the title is not fair in that we cannot truly compare apples and oranges or fossil fuels and methane, but what we can say is that both have had a tremendous impact on the atmosphere, and we really do need to understand that if we can lessen the amount of cattle that is raised for consumption of meat products, our world would be a healthier place. It was nice, wasn't it, to see that survey that said so many people have become more aware. And while not endorsing a pure or strict vegetarian or vegan diet, more and more people are learning about eating less meals, or even meals entirely without red meat as a pattern. So it's hopeful.
I agree with you. It's very encouraging. And I'm not sure I remembered that piece of data about the number of people because my organization does not promote veganism directly. We certainly love it. I'm vegan and have been for 4 years, and I was a vegetarian for 18 years before that. So uh, I'm with you. It's been a long time.
I think
Um,
it's easier for us today to lean towards being vegans because there are so many more products on the market that allow us to have that kind of cultural eating habit that with which we were raised. I I must admit that I prefer plant-based milk, plant-based yogurt and all. Yet if I'm traveling and in an airport, I will get a dairy-based yogurt. So I think there are a lot of people who are coming to understand that we can make good choices as a regular habit in our daily lives and sometimes have to be more flexible on those rare days. And if
yeah,
more
I
people think like that, I think we're making real progress.
absolutely. I think you're right. And people shouldn't feel that they can't eat when they get to be someplace where there's nothing really that's vegan. But another point that you were making, which I'd like to tie into, is that the growth definitely includes a lot of young people. And there are pieces of research out there about the anxiety level. I put out an article on this in my January newsletter called Food is Climate. Um, I think it's 57% of young people feel anxiety that's affecting their life choices, like will they have a baby? Um, Significant choices. What will they do? Where will they live? What will they do? What do they eat? Um, Based on how they feel about the climate and knowing the climate is just getting worse and heating up. So there a lot of that growth. I totally agree with you about the availability of many vegan products that weren't around a long time ago. You have so many choices,
If
and
I may,
really,
I was quite intrigued several years ago when I learned about the Sunrise Movement. And I volunteered in their earliest inception to work for them 1 day a week as a volunteer. And I set aside my own work schedule. I'm a remote freelance writer. So when I work, I get paid. And I chose not to on Sundays. And I answered emails all day through their site to help them navigate what it meant to bring younger people into understanding about the climate crisis and to alleviate what has been a corporate influence to suggest individuals are responsible for the climate crisis. Of course, that assuages the corporations for taking responsibility and making systemic change. But those sunrisers have been growing up and moving into their graduate work and their careers, and they are quite empowering for the next generation. And as they should be concerned about the climate crisis, clearly, in a way that we in the 1970s understood that we were left certain decisions and we would have to live with the consequences. This generation, more than ever, understands what their future will be like. Extreme storms, insurance debacles, um, lifestyle choices that we will never have to make in my generation. So I understand them and I have great empathy for the Generation Zs and others.
well, two of my three daughters are vegan, and actually, it was my oldest daughter who gave us a book, The China Study, and once my husband and I read it,
Yes.
was we became vegan immediately. I would think that you're in the state of Florida. You certainly see climate change very directly because you're hit with so many hurricanes right out of the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe less. My daughter has definitely
Mhm.
been in the path, but often the storms have veered away or weakened. So she's been lucky. But the last storm, Helene, hurricane,
Yes.
she had 5 friends that lost their homes. Most of them were living on a small island right off Tampa. But yeah.
No, we here in
Devastating.
Florida are caught in a very difficult situation. We have a governor who has refused to allow the words climate change to be allowed in any legislation. We see the effects of a warming ocean. We see the storms that are so much more frequent. We're having terrible insurance dilemmas. How, if we live in complexes, how do they get insured when the insurance companies are just escaping the state? It's a real dilemma. And as you mentioned, people are losing their life savings that they devote to homes, and many cannot afford insurance anymore. So it is local, absolutely. And really, what we can do is to speak out in a way that is accessible to other people. I've learned that we really cannot talk about a lot of numbers and a lot of jargon. We have to speak a language that people understand, whether it's from the foods you eat, how much electricity you choose to power your lives, or how you advocate on a larger scale. Difficult topics and questions. And advocates like us have to assuage concerns by also being active listeners.
I think that's great advice and great knowledge that you have. So since you've brought up the particular environment that you're in, and I'm talking political environment that you're in the state of Florida, and we're all aware of that. The bigger political environment just happened 3 days ago here in Washington, as you know. So let's, if we could, take a few minutes to talk about that, because we had all kinds of a flurry of proclamations yesterday or the day before from this administration already that are very alarming. Some of the things he's talking about undoing, the Infrastructure Reduction Act, and the one that provided a lot of money for conservation type things and new energy, solar energy. He has talked about halting those pieces of legislation that passed and already funded by the last Congress, not the current Congress, but the previous Congress in the first 2 years of Biden. So I guess if we could just jump into that a bit and see what you have, just what your thoughts are on how we might move forward. He's not going to be able to, since that money is already allocated, I'm not sure how much he can keep it from being spent. But anyway, any thoughts you have on that, Carolyn?
Absolutely. And you must know that you're talking to an internal optimist. So I will frame it like that. And I think the point you made just now is well taken, Jane, in that so much of this is legislative and already in process in the states. So it would be very difficult to undo what has already happened. Plus, businesses plan out 5, 10, 20 years. They're on a trajectory to not only decarbonize, but to save money on their bottom lines through this decarbonization. They're not necessarily doing it for the common good. They're doing it because it is the right thing for their business. These businesses do not want stranded assets. And so I feel that with the knowledge of seeing 4 previous years of the Trump administration, that there will likely be a lot of internal fighting, that it is hard to come to consensus anyways in a democracy. Democracy is very messy, and I suspect this will be more so. I also know that there is a paradox going on where a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act uh, funding went to the red states, and it wasn't perhaps framed as well as it could have been that the Democratic led Congress passed that, because the red state governors took a lot of credit for it, and so did the senators, even though they did not vote for it. That being said, we're going to get some sadness. We're going to see probably some offshore wind projects slowed because they are concerned about regulatory processes. Solar has been in the works for decades. We know Carter, the president who just passed, had it on the roof of the White House as an example, and then the Reagan administration removed it. We've made a lot of progress since then. The cost has gone down. The battery storage capability has increased exponentially. And I think these are positives for business, for communities, and I do believe that they will continue, perhaps not at the rate as if Harris had been elected. She had a tough 90 days to try to make a message stick, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. But I don't think that's our topic today.
Well, and we know that there wasn't any landslide. The margin was very tiny. And we also know, I don't know, was it $640 million that Elon Musk threw into the pot on behalf of Trump? So there was a lot of
40, but it's still substantial. Yeah.
the advertising campaign, I think was, well, I'm not sure. That aggressive advertising campaign was huge.
And it speaks to how we now buy our government, which is such a sad commentary on where we are. You and I could not run for office. We do not have the financial backing to do so. And yet, I guess we cannot let that stop us, that we have to continue to be prudent and speak out and let our voices be heard, but also align ourselves. Third Act, the Bill McKibben organization for older U.S. citizens continues to be active and promoting the need to address the climate crisis on an institutional basis rather than just our individual.
Well, let me jump in there because certainly your efforts and your work in journalism are doing such a great job at this. You know, we met through your article about methane and animal agriculture, which is, of course, a key topic for me. But you did one more recently about the droughts that are taking part or happening rather in many parts of the world. They're droughts that continue and they're becoming permanent. And your article referenced the huge impact this was going to have on food production and agriculture. And you also referenced part of the cause had to do not with just lack of rain, but with salt. That was a very interesting article. And I wonder if you could just give us a few snippets from your memory of, I think it wasn't too long ago that you wrote that.
Well, clearly, the extreme weather that we're experiencing around the world is affecting communities, and agriculture is being tremendously impacted. There will be regions that were agricultural based and sustaining entire communities that will no longer be viable. What we also must link to is the fact that the fear of immigrants coming into not just the United States, but other countries around the world is a direct relationship to their own home communities no longer being viable places to live because of the climate crisis. Of course, people would rather stay home, stay in their familiar communities with their cultural familiarity, and yet they cannot do so. And so corporations, big oil, etc., really do not want to limit their bottom line profitability until absolutely necessary. So it's easier to deflect into a fear of the other, a fear of people coming to the US for safe harbor in a way that's who we were as a young country. And yet we have abandoned that view. And so it will not just be drought, it will be flooding. It will be soil degradation due to over fertilization. It will be rejecting the thousands of years of indigenous practices to um, rotate soil and renourish the soil and plant items together that work to create soil health, rerouting rivers. I've been fascinated lately about dams, uh, dams that were built to reroute river systems that have now slowly been deconstructed, and salmon are coming back to these areas that were depleted of them for decades. So there is hope. There is also a societal struggle for food that we must make people aware of, because starvation will be rampant otherwise.
Um, I'm pleased to hear you talk about some of the old practices coming back and some of the indigenous populations. As I mentioned, I worked with Native Americans in the United States
Yes.
for 9 years, and were the first environmentalists and continue to have practices that are hugely more beneficial to saving Earth. I have in my refrigerator a little statement from one of the chieftains from, I forget which tribe, but he says, we don't own the earth, we inherit it from our children. And it's a good way to think about our relationship with earth, is we want to leave it really in the same way, or in a way that's usable for our children. But getting back to what's happening globally with agriculture. I know that 80% of all arable land that can be used for agriculture worldwide, only produces 20% of the food that is needed. And so much of that is being used by cows, and the deforestation that's taking place, particularly in tropical rainforests like in Brazil, are making it just so much more difficult, because animals eat, every cow weighs what, 2 ton, something like that. They drink 242 gallons of water every day. It's massive amount of food and resources go to animal agriculture. I just wonder if you have any comment about that situation, the deforestation, and how we use those resources to produce food for people. Let's leave out the middleman. Let's leave out the cow and use those resources directly for humans.
And we could look specifically at the Amazon rainforest and understand the degradation that is taking place because of the deforestation that you mentioned. When we eliminate that canopy, we are warming our planet so much more quickly. Anybody who took basic botany knows that the trees, the plants, the green is the savior for us. They are absorbing the CO2. And when we take down the Amazon rainforest and other forests around the world in order to graze cattle, we are doubly devastating the planet. We are working the soil in a way that is not protecting those ecosystems that live under the canopy. We are not absorbing the CO2. It is a double whammy that really is needs to be made more transparent, I think, to audiences.
Absolutely. Well, you have been a wonderful source of information today, and always with the journalism that you do. I wonder if you have any last comments that you'd like to make, or your hope for the future in what may be trying times, but this is how you learn a lot when things are rough, right?
Absolutely. So I can say that we can help to empower each other through talking about these very topics. Why we have decided to have a plant based diet, even if it's a partial one. what we know about the local consequences of the climate crisis, how we can reframe language so it is not so accusatory, but rather informative. Ways that we can nurture each other, even across political lines, so that our climate choices in a general sense and our diets specifically can work toward promoting a more sustainable world. And, if we can take some kind of common discourse like that and create a gestalt, it is more likely that corporations will change their focus because they will want to continue to be profitable. Yes, it can start locally. No, the answer is not completely local, but I think we can force systemic change if we work together.
That is such a wonderful message to leave our viewers with and our listeners. And you make a good point about business and what they contribute. And I think we both agreed that the growth in veganism and vegetarianism has a lot to do with business making it so much easier for us to find food that's absolutely delicious and convenient to make. I know
And
the meat
advent of
producers.
online, there are so many great vegan and vegetarian recipes out there. I really suggest doing a little research. It can be awfully fun and a new cultural swing in your life.
We have Climate Diet puts a recipe out every Friday. Get on my list if you want to get any of ours. We make them available free. They're plant-based and we have photos and they're pretty easy. It's just a little image that you can print off. But yeah, we do that every Friday. And I love your idea of having more dialogue on the messaging part of that, and love to talk to you about that offline. But
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today for what has been a really great conversation about food, climate, how we can take it forward, and being hopeful about the future.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you had overheard the raindrops, I mean, here we are in stormy conditions, and I hope it's not going to be a pattern, but we're going to make the best of it. And thank you, Jane, for all the work that you do. Certainly, it is a wonderful step forward for a lot of people, including the next generation.
This is Climate Diet signing off, Jane DeMarines, and we appreciate Carolyn Fortuna, a journalist with CleanTechnica and also a journalist with Substack. So Carolyn, thank you for all of your work and being our guest today. And thank you all for listening.
Take care. Thank you.